Three reasons why God isolates the chosen ones. Isolation means different things to different people in different situations. However, according to the Bible, God isolates people to set them apart. I know that many people have their own understanding towards the mystery or the law of isolation. Let me quickly get the elephant out of the room by saying this to you. Isolation is not loneliness. Loneliness is not isolation. These are two different things. You can be surrounded by people. You can have people around you and still feel lonely. Therefore, loneliness is not isolation. Just because you are lonely, it doesn't mean God is isolating you or you have been isolated by God. Some of you, you are lonely for reasons that God is not part of. So I'm quickly going to break down to you the reasons why God isolates people. But since I brought this thing of isolation is not loneliness, let's quickly talk about isolation a little bit. What is isolation according to the Bible? When you read the book of Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, God calls Father Abraham and he says, I want you to come out of your father's country. I want you to come out of your father's nation. He then attaches a reason to why he's calling Abraham out in verses 2. He says, I want to bless you. I want to make out of you a great nation. He then goes further and say, and I want to make your name great. I want you to pay attention to the things that God says in verse 2. It then tells you and I that isolation is the mother of greatness. Great names are constructed in isolation. So isolation is not punishment, where you get people feeling like God is punishing them by isolating them. If you are chosen or one way you are called by God, I want you to pay attention to what I'm going to say, because this will unlock that which God has put in you and bring peace even in the midst of confusion in your life. So the first reason why God isolates people is to prepare people, because the word isolation means to be set apart, to be separated. So God separates people to prepare them. One thing about God is that God does not take chances. You cannot be used by God accidentally, meaning you cannot be used by God and God does not know he's using you. Hence, anybody that God is going to use, God will prepare that person. And that is because God cannot assign and put somebody on an assignment who he himself has not prepared. I'll give a couple of scriptures so you'll understand what I'm saying. When you look at the life of David, David was anointed at the age of 15, but became a king at the age of 30. Why? Because the 15 years that he was not a king, God was preparing him. And that is because if you are going to represent God one way or the other, God will have to make sure that you are equipped, that you are prepared. So isolation is a season of preparation, because every gift that a person has a date of birth. Let me quickly break that one down. No one gets born today and immediately they know what they are born for. Nobody gets born today and immediately they know why they are here. It is in isolation that God is going to reveal your gift to you. So we call that a stage where your gift is birthed. So there are 3 stages to it, right? So the first stage is where your gift is birthed. This is where you become aware. So isolation plays a very important role in you being aware of what you carry. So God has to prepare you, but in order for him to do that, he has to separate you. That was too deep. He has to prepare you. So I'm isolated, not because I've been rejected by God. I'm isolated because I'm being prepared by God. The second reason why God isolates the chosen ones is because God wants to capacitate the chosen one. One thing about God is whenever he calls men, he does not immediately, after calling men, commission men. He calls men, he colleges men, he then commissions men. And it is in the colleging that God will capacitate the chosen ones. And how does he do it? He will do it by isolating the chosen one. So it is not a punishment, like I said. You are being capacitated. David was anointed, I said it and I'll say it again, at the age of 15, became a king at the age of 30. What was he doing for these 15 years? He was being capacitated. That's why it was easy for him to look at Goliath and say, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? It is because the man was capacitated behind the scene. And when he showed up in public, he was ready. He knew who he was. He knew who his God was. And when they asked him, how are you going to do this? He gives testimonies that nobody knows about. He says, while I was looking after my father's sheep, a bear came, took one of the sheep. When I went after the bear, Mambara scattered the bear, took back the sheep. And another time a lion came, took one of the sheep. Zachara scattered the lion and took back the sheep. These are testimonies and these are encounters that nobody knows about. But he himself knows about them. So when God now capacitates the chosen ones, this is where they start having different encounters. I'll give another example. In the book of Genesis chapter 32 and you read verse 24, you realize that when Jacob met with the angel of the Lord, rather wrestled with the angel of the Lord, he was alone. Jacob was not a lonely man. He had wives, he had servants, he had children. But when he had the encounter that he had, he was alone. And that is because there are certain encounters you will never have as long as you are too much everywhere, as long as you are too much in the public. You will never have certain encounters. Certain encounters, God will cause you to be isolated to have them. That's why we say, if you want to have divine encounters, master the law and know the law of isolation. Once you understand the mystery of isolation, you will embrace that mystery. Paul was called by God, and we know what happened to him in Acts 9, where he went blind. But remember, his name was Saul. When he met Jesus on his way to Damascus, his name was Saul. Light hit him. He became blind. For 3 days, he was isolated. But when he came out, he was no longer Saul. He was Paul. And that is because you can't be isolated by God and come out the same. When God takes you through that season, when you come out, you can't come out the same. God himself will have capacitated you because he knows that that which he has put in you, you did not put it in yourself. And you did not choose yourself. He chose you. So God will give it the backing it needs so that even when the challenges of life will try to fight it, that which is inside of you will be able to stand the test of time and will be able to stand against anything that will come against it. So it is important for you to understand that. It's not that God is punishing you. It's not that God is hating you. Every great man in the Bible went through isolation. What I'm about to say here quickly, because I'm freestyling, will blow your mind. It is in the season of being capacitated that God changes your appetite. You see, when God isolates men might have went to isolation, or to that season of isolation, to that room of isolation, maybe having certain desires or liking certain things. But trust me, when they come out, you'll be shocked that the places they used to go, they don't go no more. The people they used to hang around with, they don't hang around with no more. And that is because it is in the season of isolation that God works on your appetite. Because whenever God wants to start his work through a man, God will change the appetite of the man. When you read the Bible, you realize that when God delivered the children of Israel out of captivity, they were in the wilderness. And because remember, the children of Israel are called the chosen nation. So they were chosen. So it was not a chosen person, but chosen nation. So God had to isolate the whole nation. And he did that through that season of wilderness. And because they were isolated, guess what happens? The Bible tells us that they even ate angels' food. Why will a man leave the realm of eggs and chicken and enter into the realm of manna, the realm of angels' food? Imagine men saying, I don't want pizza, but I want what Michael eats. I don't want steak and potato. I want what Gabriel eats. And that only happens in isolation. In isolation, you begin to have appetite that you never had before you were isolated. It is in isolation that you are going to have encounters with God. So make sure that you are not the one fighting what God wants to start through you. Because some of you are your own stumbling block. God wants you here. But because of your desires, and some of them, believe it or not, are selfish, you then reject God's call over your life. And it's dangerous because some of you, when you reject God's call over your life, you are not only costing yourself, you are costing even those that will come after you. Because sometimes when God works through you, or when God starts something through you, it's not so much about you, but it's also so much about those that are coming after you. We don't know Father Abraham, but we are called his seed. What would have happened if Abraham rejected when God said, come out? And the third reason, and in this case, the last reason why God isolate the chosen ones is because God wants to elevate them. I'll repeat that. It's because God wants to elevate them. So if you're chosen by God and God isolates you, it's because God wants to elevate you. Simple as that. But I want you to understand that isolation is for elevation, but elevation will never happen until you understand the revelation of your isolation. I will say it in a way that everyone will understand. When God isolates you, he wants to elevate you. But you cannot be elevated by God until you fully understand the revelation behind your isolation. And that is because God wants to reveal certain things to you. So the longer it takes you to understand why you are being isolated, the longer you will stay in isolation. But as soon as you get it, you'll be elevated by God, because you can't go into isolation and come out the same. So everybody that goes in there, when they come out with greatness. They come out on another level. We see it from the book of Genesis down to the book of Revelation. There is a time where in the book of Galatians, Paul says something that is very powerful. He says, instead of meeting those who were apostles before him, he went to the desert of Arabia. And of course, some scholars believe he was there for 4 years. Some they believe for 3 years, for 7 years. The truth of the matter is he was there for 14 years. And then he says something in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He then says, I know of a man, whether in the spirit or in the body, I cannot tell, who was caught up in the third heaven. He saw things and heard things that is not lawful for me to utter. Paul is talking about himself there. But you and I, we know that the 14 years he's talking about, it was the season where he was in the desert of Arabia. But why will Apostle Paul disappear for 14 years? It's because whenever God chooses a person, or when God has chosen a person, he will isolate a person. And when you come out of that isolation, you will come up with different testimonies. And that is because God already has elevated you. But it is important for you to understand that that elevation, it is not just you walking with your shoulders up, trying to show people that you are no longer where you used to be. No. That elevation is basically a manifestation of that which God has put in you. It is a revealing. It is God exposing that which he has put in you that no man knew about. That you yourself, you did not know about it until you were isolated. Because there are 3 stages to a gift that God puts inside a man. There is a stage that we call gifts being birthed. Here, this is where you are aware of your gift, right? And that is where God now prepares you. Then there is a second stage where your gift is nurtured. And this is where God capacitates you. And there is the last stage where your gift is exposed or manifested. And that is where God elevates you. So it is important that when God isolates you, you don't take it as a rejection. And some of you are experiencing rejection from people because you are in a season of isolation. Because people think isolation is to be in the mountain. No. You can be in your own house, you can still go to work, yet you're isolated. And a double confirmation to that is when now you no longer fit in. You try to fit in, you don't fit in no more. You start losing appetite. You start not liking certain things that you used to like. People now go MIA on you. You try your best, but nobody's available. God does not have to take you to the mountain to isolate you. He just shuts all the doors around you. And you want to enter here, you can't enter. You want to enter here, you can't enter. You are in a season of isolation. And of course, I want to talk about something that I believe is powerful, especially for the chosen ones. How to know the area of my specialization. Because you can be chosen by God, but how do you know this is what God has chosen me for? If you'd like me to teach about that, and you'll want me to teach about that, comment and put it on the comment section and say part